CGTN, China Global Television Network. Live from London, this is Global Business.
Hello, welcome to the programme. I'm Jamie Owen.
And I'm Robin Dwyer. Our top stories. Inflation in the US falls to 4.9% in April, down from its peak of over 9% last summer. So is this the end of rate rises?
Our other headlines, Battle of the Skies. Ryanair wins its legal fight against Lufthansa's $6 billion pandemic state bailout.
Toyota announces plans for a big push into China's electric vehicle market, but it faces stiff competition from homegrown brands.
On your bike, leisure cycling grows in popularity in China as more people head for the great outdoors.
3、2、1，点火！
And blast off. China's largest cargo ship is en route to the Tiangong space station after a successful launch. The annual rate of inflation in the United States has fallen sharply since last summer's 40-year high of over 9%, but the price of goods and services remains stubbornly high.
Consumer inflation in April was 4.9%, more than double the Federal Reserve's target rate of 2%. Let's talk now to our correspondent John Terrett in New York. John, how have markets responded to this news?
Well, they are up, but they didn't shoot up. There's not like a huge gain going on here. And there's a reason for that, which I'll try to explain. So the Bureau of Labor Statistics comes out with its figures at 8:30 this morning, about 4 hours ago now. And this figure, the CPI, the Consumer Price Index, or inflation that Americans pay in the stores month on month, year on year, or the gas stations month on month or year on year, is really more important than the jobs report. Once upon a time, the jobs report was the piece of economic data in the world, and now it is American CPI. And the reason for that is it really feeds through into the thinking of the central bank, the Federal Reserve, when they come to deciding what to do about interest rates, as does its sister report, PPI, which is producer price inflation, which we're going to get tomorrow, Thursday. Now then, a lot of this is still elevated, but there is also, at the same time, some very good news. So still elevated in terms of prices are things like rent and gasoline, which I note is up 3% this month, and also used cars and some food staples, things that people on lower income eat a lot of, are still very, very elevated, which is not good news for them at all. Things like pasta and eggs and chicken, I note, and also some services as well, like airline tickets and some restaurant prices as well. So all of that is still elevated. However, the overall figures are a lot better. So here they are. This is inflation in the US between March and April was up by 0.4%, and economists thought it would be up by 0.4%. So exactly in line with what they thought. And it is a little bit more, though, than it was between February and March, which was 0.1%. So I guess that's not very good. But what is really striking is that the yearly inflation is now at 4.9%, as you said in the intro. And it hasn't been below 5% for 2 years now. So I think that gives you a little clue there. The core inflation, if you strip out food and energy, they're gone. It was up by 5.5%. And the average weekly earnings were up by 1.1%. And the Federal Reserve doesn't want earnings to be going up too far, too fast. I noticed out of interest that natural gas to heat the homes was down 4.9% in the course of this period. So the big question is, we've gone now from 9% in June of last year to pretty much 5% now, all of which is good. It's a long way from where the Fed wants us to be at 2%. But will they raise interest rates when they meet in June? And the answer is, I just don't know. I mean, every piece of data that comes in seems to suggest something else. When we had the jobs report last week, it looked for all the world as if they were likely to hike again. And then people on Wall Street tell me, no, we think they've secretly paused, but they're just not saying so. At the moment, the Dow is down by 92 points after being up pretty much by the same amount. And this is because I think that business about food and other things still being elevated is sinking in. The Nasdaq's up almost 100 points, and the S&P 500, which is much more sober, is ahead by about 8 points at the moment. So on the face of it, this is being taken as relatively good news, but more work to be done.
John, markets also obviously keenly watching the ongoing talks on the United States debt ceiling crisis. Any chance of a breakthrough there? Investors breathing a sigh of relief yet?
You know, the funny thing, and this is weird, isn't it? This is the most important story. In fact, this is the more important of the two, really. But Wall Street isn't looking at this story just yet. I mean, they were a little bit on Monday and Tuesday, I told you that, but they're not really. They're much more concerned with recession and the Federal Reserve and interest rates and, of course, the banking crisis, which we still don't think has completely gone away. So Wall Street is pretty worried about that. Now, I did tell you yesterday that there was very unlikely to be any progress whatsoever when President Biden met with senior congressional leaders at the White House at 20 hours GMT, and I was absolutely spot on. And the reason that we guessed that is because it's all too early in the process, I'm afraid to say, even though the U.S. economy, and by extension the world economy, I suppose, is literally hanging in the balance. When they met yesterday, there was absolutely no movement whatsoever. I told you yesterday we were looking for conciliatory language, a more relaxed sort of mood about things, less of the dogma, and we got none of that. The meeting lasted for 1 hour, and at the end of it, it was all back to normal. Speaker McCarthy, who's effectively the leader of the Republicans at the moment, basically saying there was no movement. Joe Biden is saying, Congress, do your job. Go ahead and raise the debt ceiling. You spent the money. You've got to do it. So in summary, they're going to try again on Friday. And there will be less than 2 weeks at that point before this June the 1st deadline comes around. So we'll see what happens on Friday. I mean, you know, I have to tell you, though, that there's a history in this country, 2011, 2013, two good examples, when they really push it to the brink until the 59th minute of the 11th hour. So I'm guessing that that's what's going to happen this time.
It'll run and run. John, thank you for that. Our correspondent, John Terrett, in New York.
Well, our correspondent Nick Harper has been looking at what the potential knock-on effects could be if there is no deal reached and the United States is unable to pay its debts.
The era of easy money could be about to come to a grinding halt. No deal on raising the debt ceiling will have staggering consequences.
The various rating agencies will immediately cut the rating of the United States.
And that, economists warn, will shake global confidence in US Treasury bonds, causing their value to drop.
It will be a blow to the reputation of the United States, and especially the reputation of the bonds of the United States, which are considered by the markets for many generations as completely risk-free.
That could trigger a meltdown in global financial markets, prompting US companies to implement mass layoffs to prepare for the possibility of a deep recession. At a time when the cost of living remains high, tens of millions of people, including retirees, may not receive their monthly social security benefits, and government employees like the military may not get paid.
What are they going to do without these checks? How are they going to pay the rent? How are they going to pay for food? How are they going to pay for transportation when they have to get somewhere?
A default could prompt the United States lenders to raise interest rates, with that borrowing increase potentially passed on to consumers, making mortgages and credit card rates more expensive. But most experts agree the dire consequences will ultimately motivate lawmakers to act.
Neither side really is eager to see a default. I think in the end, if we're coming to the deadline and they're still at an impasse, my guess is that they'll find a way to extend the time limit and give themselves more time to talk.
Now a nervous wait ahead of the June 1st deadline. That's the date that the US is expected to run out of money and be unable to pay its debts. A scenario that Janet Yellen, the Treasury Secretary, says will cause an economic and financial catastrophe. Nick Harper, CGTN, Washington.
Donald Trump has been found guilty of sexual abuse and defamation by a New York court after a case brought by columnist E. Jean Carroll, who accused him of raping her in a department store changing room 27 years ago.
Whilst Trump was found not guilty of rape, this verdict means that for the first time, a former United States president has been found guilty of being a sexual predator. The jury awarded Carroll $5 million in compensation and damages. Trump denies all the charges.
Well, our correspondent Will Denslow is in New York. So, Will, in the end, less than 3 hours for the jury to make their decision on this. What happened in court?
Absolutely. And, well, as you rightly mentioned, Donald Trump is railing against what the jury found. Of course, this was a civil trial, so the burden of proof was lower than you'd expect in a criminal court. But essentially, the jury found that more likely than not, Donald Trump sexually abused E. Jean Carroll in a changing room at Bergdorf Goodman, a department store here in Manhattan back in the mid-1990s. They also believed that Donald Trump defamed her in comments he made on Truth Social back in October of last year, hence the paying of $5 million in damages. Now, Donald Trump took to social media shortly after that verdict on Tuesday afternoon here in New York, and he's been back on social media this Wednesday. He said that it was a rigged hoax, a travesty of justice. He said the verdict was a disgrace. Essentially, he's saying that the justice system has been weaponized by Democrats to hurt his bid of reclaiming the White House in 2024. He says he is hopeful that justice will be served on the appeal. Now, we have heard from E. Jean Carroll. She says that she brought this suit forward to clear her name. She achieved that. Her legal team also saying that this showed that nobody was above the law, and it was a win for democracy.
Also in court, Republican Congressman George Santos, who's been indicted and charged. What with?
That's absolutely right. 13 counts. George Santos faces 7 counts of wire fraud, 3 counts of money laundering, 1 of theft of public funds, 2 counts of materially false statements to the House of Representatives. Now, these are incredibly serious charges, and if we look at just the charges of wire fraud alone, that brings with it the possibility of 140 years behind bars. Now, these really stem from 3 key tenets, according to prosecutors. The first, that George Santos allegedly directed a political consultant to gain campaign finances that were instead, though, used for personal expenses for George Santos, or so the claims allege. The other is that he fraudulently claimed unemployment benefits during the COVID-19 pandemic to the tune of $24,000. That, though, while he was allegedly working for an investment firm and claiming $120,000 per year. Another claim is that he falsified statements and inflated his salary in 2020 and 2022. We haven't heard directly from Santos since these charges were unsealed, but he has previously said that the charges against him are false and he has done nothing wrong.
Will, thank you very much. Our correspondent Will Denslow in New York.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, Russia accused of planning to move thousands of workers from the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power station. Ukraine says it'll lead to a catastrophic lack of personnel.
Ever wondered what's the difference between a bear and a bull market? Where are the cash cows? And who are the lame ducks? And what exactly are black swans, grey rhinos, and unicorn companies? Make sense of it all with Global Business, only on CGTN.
There's a new agenda for a new world, accelerating change in almost every part of our lives. It's shifting the norms of how we work, travel, and connect. How we think, interact, and develop. It's a new reality, a new agenda with me, Juliet Mann.
Welcome back to Global Business Europe. Pakistan's opposition leader and former Prime Minister Imran Khan will be held in police custody on corruption charges for 8 days.
There have been fresh demonstrations a day after his arrest, including in the capital Islamabad, where police fired tear gas at supporters as Khan appeared in court. The army has been deployed to various provinces following the protests. Khan, who pleaded not guilty to all the charges, denies any wrongdoing. His legal team says they'll challenge his detention.
First of all, the arrest of Imran Khan is state abduction. It is not an arrest. It is state abduction. Secondly, the way Imran Khan was arrested is proof that our constitution does not exist in this country.
Umair Karim is a researcher specialising in Pakistan and the Middle East at the University of Birmingham.
Within Pakistan, and particularly within the province of Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, and areas within the Punjab province, two of the most populous provinces of the country, remains exceptionally volatile. Maybe not in smaller rural towns, but definitely in larger town cities. It remains volatile, and crowds sympathetic to Imran Khan, they have demonstrated, and they have also committed violent acts. And now, because of this, the civilian administration, it has, to a large extent, lost its writ in both of these provinces, and that's why they have called the military to control the law and order situation. So it's what I am hearing, there is a lot of confusion, but also chaos, and also a lot of anger within the supporters of Imran Khan, who was a former prime minister and also remains, to some extent, the most popular leader within the country.
So you say he's the most popular leader in the country. Just how much support does Imran Khan have, and how politically divided is Pakistani society?
I think it will be right to say that the Pakistani society is politically polarized, especially within Punjab, which remains the political heartland of the country. There is polarization. But even considering that, all recent surveys and polls have put Imran Khan nearly in double the lead to his next contender, which is the former Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif of the Pakistan Muslim League Nawaz. So that shows that even in Punjab, which has traditionally remained the heartland of the PMLN, Imran Khan is leading the way, and this popularity has actually translated now into these protests and huge mobilizations, which shows that people are not only supporting Imran Khan, but they are ready to take out onto roads and to take on the state apparatus because of his arrest.
So this is the second day of protest now. What do you think they might mean for the country's security?
I think this is really bad news for country's law and order and general security situation, because already there has been an uptick in violence and acts of terrorism within the Khyber Pakhtunkhwa province, which borders Afghanistan, and which has seen the Tehrik-e-Taliban Pakistan TTP increasing its attacks in the last few months. And because there is another factor that both of these provinces, they don't have a representative government. They were meant to be holding elections in these two provinces. So these two provinces are basically run by an interim setup, which doesn't have any legitimacy within the people. So that complicates the situation even further, and makes it difficult for the law enforcement agencies to enforce the writ of state. And I think that this will only increase with this new chaos adding up.
Ukraine has accused Russia of planning to evacuate thousands of workers from the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power station, saying it'll lead to a catastrophic lack of qualified personnel. Kyiv's state-owned nuclear energy company says Moscow will move more than 3,000 people from a town near the plant. Russia hasn't commented. Last week, the United Nations nuclear watchdog described the situation at Zaporizhzhia as potentially dangerous.
Meanwhile, talks are underway in Brussels on new sanctions aimed at companies bypassing Russian trade curbs. The proposals would target a number of firms, including some from China and Iran. Export curbs could also be imposed on third countries. There's said to be widespread disagreement within the EU, with some concerns over the impact on international relations. All 27 EU countries must agree on the new sanctions before they can be brought in.
Well, a deal allowing grain exports from Ukraine is in danger of collapsing. Russia says it could withdraw from the agreement within a matter of days, claiming it compromises its own agricultural exports. The deal was brokered last July to try to tackle global food shortages brought about by the invasion of Ukraine. Well, let's talk now to our correspondent Stuart Smith in Moscow. Stuart, Moscow threatening to walk away from this deal. What more do we know?
Yeah, that's been the position of Russia for months, because it says the guarantees it was expecting from Ukraine, Turkey and the United Nations have not manifested. Despite there being an agreement, in practice, Russia says it's not getting what it needs in terms of sanctions, in terms of insurance and logistics problems that it says are still plaguing its fertilizer and agricultural industries. Now, the Kremlin says there's no misunderstanding about what Russia wants, that all of these four players know exactly what Russia needs for the renewal of the grain deal after May 18th. But so far, the Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs says it still hasn't got the reassurances it needs. There will be, sometime this week, a meeting of defence ministers, or deputy defence ministers, rather, which would be the highest level talks with all four parties talking together about what steps could be taken. If that doesn't succeed, that does seem likely to be the end of the grain deal. The United Nations, though, has been commenting on the fact that already there are day-to-day problems. Here's the deputy spokesperson for the United Nations.
There are 62 vessels waiting to move to Ukrainian ports. Out of these, 8 applications have been sent to the JCC for registration. The Office of the UN Coordinator and the delegation of Turkey are working closely with all sides with the aim to facilitate movements and inspections of inbound and outbound vessels within the framework of the initiative, and agreed procedures while discussions for the future of the initiative continue.
The reason for that, Russia says, is it's not willing to allow new registration of ships that aren't on the system already, because it's worried they will not be able to leave the Black Sea by the end of that deal, May 18th.
Stuart, we're hearing reports that Ukraine has made gains in Bakhmut. Russia's Wagner mercenary group is, of course, fighting there. Have they said anything?
Yeah, normally Ukrainian gains and Russian retreats are not something we're able to talk about here, but Yevgeny Prigozhin, the head of the Wagner private military company, has said publicly that that's exactly what's happened. He said Russian infantry forces were pushed back to potentially a brigade, he alleges, which could be thousands of troops. He says they lost 3 square kilometers and hundreds of his own troops were killed when they tried to rescue this Russian infantry brigade. Now, the Russian Ministry of Defense hasn't commented on that, but it does match indeed with Ukrainian statements. Yevgeny Prigozhin over the past week has been making a lot of claims about the inadequacy of supplies from the Russian Ministry of Defense, alleging they're not providing his teams with enough ammunition and shells. He's then said that that dispute was resolved. He'd got promises from the MOD. A day later, he says, actually, the promises have not been fulfilled, and he's still short of shells. He says they're working with 10% as much as they need. So for now, Bakhmut, Yevgeny Prigozhin is warning, could be taken back.
Stuart, thank you for that. Our correspondent Stuart Smith in Moscow.
China's foreign minister has called for better dialogue and cooperation with Germany, saying it will bring more peace and stability to the world.
Qin Gang made his comments after meeting the German Chancellor Olaf Scholz in Berlin. He's now travelled on to France for talks on Ukraine, green development and aviation.
Well, our correspondent Ross Cullen is in Paris. Ross, what's on Qin Gang's agenda?
Yeah, hi Robin, hi Jamie. In about an hour's time or so, those meetings will get underway. Catherine Colonna, the French Foreign Minister, hosting her Chinese counterpart for talks, wide-ranging discussions expected to focus on Ukraine, as those conversations with Annalena Baerbock did in Germany when Qin Gang made its first stop of this 3-country tour. Qin Gang will go to Norway next, but it's France for the time being. Discussions about what China describes as a crisis, Russia describes as a special military operation, but France in no uncertain terms describes as a war and an invasion. And Catherine Colonna will be interested to hear more about China's possible delegation coming to Ukraine, routes for a potential political solution to the crisis, perhaps an immediate ceasefire, things that Europe and China are both calling for. They will also discuss shared foreign policy priorities on fighting climate change, also likely to follow up on some of the business deals, commercial contracts signed last month during French President Emmanuel Macron's trip to China. One of those sectors where there was some progress and where some deals were signed was in the aviation sector. And here is our report.
France and China have a growing partnership when it comes to business deals. Last month, during the French president's trip to China, the chief executive of Airbus signed off on new contracts. The European plane maker plans to open a second final assembly line in China that will double its production capacity in the country. Airbus also agreed a deal with GDAT, one of China's top helicopter firms, with the head of Airbus helicopters in China hailing the size and attractiveness of the country's market for aircraft makers.
It's a very large and dynamic market in the aviation segment, and Airbus, as well as Airbus helicopters, have been present for the last 50 years. And just like in many other industries, it's a very strategic market with let's say a good volume today and a huge growth potential.
Airbus's main operations are focused on its long and short-haul planes, but its helicopter business is also growing.
We're not just here to sell helicopters. We're also here to, let's say, to enter into cooperations. And I think what the Chinese market, helicopter market needs is, let's say, is support in developing infrastructure to allow helicopters to operate efficiently and serve society as they do all around the world.
In terms of the wider aviation sector, Air France is ramping up flights to China. The French flag carrier is rebuilding its Chinese network back to pre-pandemic levels. By July the 1st, the airline expects flights to Beijing, Hong Kong and Shanghai to be operating daily. Globally, aviation continues to recover strongly from COVID-19, with airlines operating 1.7 million more international seats in April than in March, and a near tripling of demand for Asia-Pacific carriers. With Airbus, one of the world's two biggest plane makers headquartered here, and Air France restoring its China routes, the business partnership between Paris and Beijing in the aviation sector is really starting to take off. Ross Cullen, CGTN, Paris.
Meanwhile, China's vice president is in the Netherlands, the final leg of his European tour.
Han Zheng's visit follows his visit to Portugal when he met the vice mayor of Porto. The pair visited a magnolia tree planted in 2014 to celebrate the twinning of the cities of Porto and Shanghai.
It's a pleasure to have the vice president of China, such a big country, which we have even at economic level, but not only at cultural level, several connections. So it's very important for us to have him here, and it was very nice to have him so pleasure with the walk in the morning. We are currently in several huge developments and construction of new metro lines, and also the renewal of all our bus fleets, so in Porto. And so there was several opportunities which Chinese companies have made it.
China says its cooperation with Italy on the Belt and Road Infrastructure Initiative has been successful and should continue. This all follows reports that Italy is considering withdrawing from the programme.
Since China and Italy signed the cooperation document on jointly building the Belt and Road, the two countries have achieved fruitful results in various fields. We should further tap the cooperation potential of the Belt and Road Initiative so that the results of development will further benefit the two countries and their people.
China-EU relations were high on the agenda at a gathering in Brussels hosted by Peking University and the China Chamber of Commerce to the EU. CGTN's correspondent Juliet Mann spoke to His Excellency Pu Cong in his first television interview since becoming China's ambassador to the EU.
It is actually a gradual resumption of the contacts between the two sides after the 3 years of pandemic, and I'm very glad to see that actually there is a good momentum. And I'm sure you have seen the flurry of high-level visits to Beijing last month, and the in the past couple of weeks, and actually starting from December, starting from President Michel's visit to China, and then followed by senior officials and senior leaders from the European side, and now there's a good momentum for the bilateral relations. And also from the Chinese side, we also have received a number of senior level delegations to Europe. So actually this signifies a new start for the bilateral relations.
You do think that the relationship between China and the European Union is important? You've said it before.
Yes.
Why in particular? Is it all about trade?
No, it's not. Actually, as I said, indeed, in terms of trade, China and the EU are complementary towards each other. And also, actually, we are the second largest trade partners to each other. So indeed, that shows the importance. But actually, our relationship does not stop there. And in terms of the political aspect, as I said, we see Europe as an important power center in the world. It has a great role to play on the world stage. And there are so many things that China and the EU have in common. And we all advocate multilateralism, for instance. And there are global issues that China and EU are willing to cooperate in order to tackle these global issues, for instance, climate change, for one thing, and other issues like the non-proliferation of weapons of mass destruction, and also the people-to-people contact. Actually, there is a fountain of goodwill on both sides, and actually this constitutes the basis for good relations between the two sides.
And you can see more of that interview on the agenda with Juliet Mann this weekend here on CGTN.
And you can get highlights from the week's news in Europe and China direct to your inbox from CGTN's storyboard email newsletter. Sign up at europe.cgtn.com/newsletter.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead. Who's overtaking and who's lagging behind? The race for dominance in China's EV car market.
Each day, there are millions of stories. Each one can open new perspectives, new possibilities. Wherever you look, we are there to see, discover, explore. We put the pieces together to find what really matters to you, all around the world, all around the clock. Our reporters are at home across the globe. From our headquarters in Beijing and production centers in Washington, Nairobi, and London, China Global Television Network. Reaching people across the globe. CGTN. See the difference. Facing the unknown is always difficult. In a world in turmoil, it's easy to lose orientation. But when the storms come, we have to see the possibilities, reinvent, find new opportunities, discover a path forward. CGTN. See the difference.
What do we mean when we talk about the difference?
Brazen axe.
The difference is in the detail, the background,
Defense ministers from
the wider angle and perspective of every story. Wherever the story may be. CGTN. See the difference.
Hello, welcome back to Global Business Europe with Jamie Owen and Robin Dwyer. Low-cost carrier Ryanair has won its challenge against Lufthansa's 2020 state bailout in a major setback for European regulators.
A top European court said the German government's $6.6 billion rescue package for the airline should not have been approved at European level. The court said the airline could have secured market financing and also failed to buy back government shares on time. The European Commission could now impose financial penalties or ask the airline to divest some of its slots in Germany. Paul Charles is CEO of the travel consultancy PC Agency. I asked him whether this would have a long-term impact on Lufthansa.
Lufthansa, of course, is having a bumper payday at the moment because of the return to travel post-COVID. It's raised its ticket prices quite healthily and it is returning to profit. So financially, it's in a much stronger position. It's also paid back that $6 billion, so it's given it back over the last few months. So arguably, financially, it's not benefited. However, Ryanair claim they've benefited from market share.
So Ryanair was the one that initiated this case against Lufthansa. They also brought another case against the Scandinavian airline SAS. Will there be more, do you think?
Well, this throws open now the whole issue of state aid during the COVID pandemic. It wasn't just Lufthansa and SAS that benefited from European state aid from the Commission. Other airlines too. More than 30 other airlines got some form of state aid support, including Iberia and Vele. And they benefited to the tune of some 1.1 billion euros in 2020. So I think this is now going to throw open other cases. Ryanair won't rest on their laurels. They will now go after others who benefited on routes where Ryanair competes with them. And they'll say, well, hang on a moment. We also expect them to look into the other state aid cases. So, yes, I think you'll find that some of the big flag carriers will be quaking in their boots, wondering if they're also going to lose similar cases.
Ryanair's Europe's largest low-cost carrier, its largest airline in total. Does it really need this level playing field that it's calling for?
Ryanair, its very existence relies on not seeing state aid go to its competitors. It believes there should be a free market in Europe. It's been very praising of the European Commission today by saying, in fact, that they uphold free competition normally within the EU. They've created a big free market for airlines. So it's praising the Commission and the European structure overall, whereas in the past they've been quite critical of some of the rulings. But Ryanair are in a strong position. They're saying there shouldn't be state aid if it's not needed. There should be a level playing field. And Lufthansa has fallen foul of the rules here. It's been a very good week for Ryanair. They placed a massive order with Boeing this week for 300 new aircraft. They've won in the European courts today. And I've no doubt their CEO, Mike O'Leary, will be on cloud nine with this decision.
Air New Zealand says it will debut its Skynest sleep pods next year. Passengers in economy class will be able to book the pods for a few hours sleep at a cost of nearly $100 an hour. They'll be added to some of the airline's existing Boeing 747 fleet and will debut on long-distance routes from Auckland to the United States. Microsoft has invested an undisclosed sum into a startup helping those without coding experience design apps. The aim is to allow users to build business apps within Microsoft's Teams video chat software using AI technology. The partnership with London-based builder .ai allows non-tech-savvy users to develop and manage apps. Twitter is adding encryption to its private messaging with voice and video chat to follow. Chief Executive Elon Musk announced the move in a tweet. Since buying Twitter last year, Musk has been trying to overhaul the platform with plans for an everything app that includes secure messaging, long-form tweets and payments.
Let's talk cars. Toyota says it expects operating profit to climb to 10% this year to more than $22 billion. The Japanese car maker forecast a five-fold jump in electric vehicle sales by March 2024. Toyota's strategy has seen it come under pressure in China, the world's biggest car market, where local electric vehicle brands have moved aggressively to gain market share, weakening the dominance of established foreign brands. Investors at Volkswagen's annual shareholder meeting have raised concerns that the company is falling behind in China's increasingly competitive EV market. The chief executive, Oliver Blum, acknowledged the fast pace of China's electrification and outlined VW's strategy to hold on to its position as the market leader by trying to tailor products to Chinese tastes and building local partnerships. Well, VW used to be the leading car brand in China, but now it's being overtaken by homegrown brands like BYD. Domestic Chinese car sales have been rising steeply since the year 2020. This year, for the first time, Chinese brands have taken over 50% of the country's market. Car brands winning market share include BYD, XPeng, Li Auto and NIO, brands that are becoming increasingly popular among China's domestic consumers. Well, let's talk now to Jim Holder, the distinguished automotive industry expert. Jim, good to see you. Well, the figures are pretty stark. Foreign companies, VW, Toyota, will have less than 50% of China's car market in the first time in years. Why? Why have we seen such a decline in these sales from these huge brands?
I think it's very clear that the Chinese car makers have been under the auspices of the Chinese authorities planning for this transition for decades. They saw their opportunity in electrification to leapfrog the established players. They had tried and failed with combustion engines to get a hold not only in their home market but also their markets abroad. What they saw was this opportunity coming, and they invested heavily, they invested early, they have the raw materials, they have access to what they need in order to succeed in this market. And now, not only are they succeeding at home, they are starting to launch their plans to launch abroad. And we're seeing that here in Europe, particularly with, as you say, BYD.
I mean, it's not just giving the established brands a run for their money, they're overtaking. I mean, Chinese car manufacturers like BYD really are about to overtake the sales of foreign brands.
Absolutely. By volume, they're set to become the world's largest electric car maker this year, overtaking Tesla. They are producing very high-quality product at a very competitive price. I think there is a fear among the established brands that the electric car is becoming homogenized. There is less ways of differentiating yourself if you go beyond the brand itself. And I think that's where they're staring into the abyss and having this existential crisis. The market is open at the moment for these Chinese car makers. We have seen some moves in America in particular to try and stimulate investments in electric vehicles from homegrown manufacturing. But at the moment, China has the advantage, and we are leaving the door open for them to come and take all that they can out of the market as a result.
Well, Volkswagen's boardroom sounds a rather uncomfortable place to be at the moment. I mean, what do these foreign car manufacturers need to do to regain popularity in the Chinese market?
I think they need to move fast. They can't rely on brand alone anymore. For decades, they have scooped massive profits in China by being able to sell off the qualities of Western brands. But they're now perceived as having moved too slowly into the age of electrification. There are also other advantages in China around the tech that you can get in your vehicles. And they need to respond. They need not to rest on their laurels. They need to be able to justify the price premiums that they typically charge. And if they really want to hold on to the mass market ground that they have traditionally had as their own, they need to move quickly, because this once-in-a-generation shift is already well underway.
Let's just look at the race between BYD and Tesla. I mean, BYD now surpassing Tesla in the production of EVs, boosting output by, I think it's 211% in 2022. I mean, is this something that those foreign firms should simply be threatened by? Is it all over? Are these two monoliths of brands going to win it?
I think it's too early to call, but what I would say is that what we need to understand is BYD's profit margins. Now, they can afford perhaps to be accumulative as they gain market share and as they establish their brand quality, but it is a big leap from volume to profitability, and that is one of the journeys that the Western car makers have been on these last few years. Those profits, of course, drive the R&D investment of the future, and that can be cyclical as a result of who's winning and who's losing. But I think you underestimate the likes of BYD, other Chinese car makers at your peril. They have this growing dominance in their home market, and that's where you typically drive the profits that you can invest to then take on a global assault of different markets.
Jim, good to see you. Thanks for coming on the programme again, the motor industry expert Jim Holder.
As one of the world's most popular apps, TikTok regularly courts controversy. It's been investigated for its impact on users, which isn't easy to quantify or fully understand. Its range of content is so broad, from job hunting or sharing the stories of how you got fired from your old job. Our correspondent Mark New reports.
So far this year, the global tech industry has laid off more than 170,000 people. Where do the unemployed workers go for comfort? Thousands choose TikTok.
Month 4 of my job search, and I am ready to give up.
An email that said, "Congratulations, you've been laid off."
I got laid off 2 days ago. Let's talk about it. But first. Oh, wow.
The thing with TikTok is it's so easy to go viral these days that it's really opened up this idea where people can just turn their cameras on, hit record, start talking about how they got fired, how they got laid off, talk about the raw emotions that are going on.
After losing her job as a tech recruiter, Bailey Harris posted this video on TikTok.
Then 10 minutes later, he hits me with a "I'm so sorry."
Bailey's second TikTok video ever has now been viewed more than 447,000 times.
So yeah, I'm unemployed, but I have a hell of a lot of confidence in myself.
I want to help you land another job after leaving your toxic one.
Career coach Jonathan Javier has actually used the power of TikTok to help many of his clients land jobs.
There's so much aspects of going viral on the platform, and hiring managers and recruiters all the time are reaching out to these candidates saying, "Hey, I saw your video on TikTok." There's so much ability to find work, especially on TikTok.
He says besides LinkedIn, TikTok is the next best social media tool for connecting with people to find work.
You never know who is going to see your content, and you're never going to know who's going to see those skills and experiences that you could see on a piece of paper, but imagine the eyes that could be seen on that resume or on your profile. You have the potential to reach hundreds of thousands of people rather than applying to just jobs.
While many of these videos poke fun at a serious situation, one Salting CEO advises people not to bash their former employer, because that could leave recruiters wondering if they do the same thing to their company. But some people are naming their former employers, and for those who don't, it's not hard to find out who they actually work for. So could that change the way companies fire people in the future?
This is the first time in history where people can turn on their camera and go viral and talk about their experience. I think in the past, mainstream media really owned that narrative. Tech companies got to own that narrative. And so we're really seeing a shift in, I don't want to say power, but at least like who gets to tell the story.
Judge says while it can be either the employer or employee who is at fault for the layoff, this new era of TikTok posting has the potential to make the firing process more transparent for all.
I got laid off. It's a little crazy how things work out.
Mark New, CGTN, San Francisco.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead. Blast off. China's largest cargo ship is en route to the country's space station after the successful launch.
Events have consequences. Words create impact.
Unprecedented scenes that we saw.
The cleanup operation is now well and truly underway.
Parts of southern Europe remain in a state of emergency.
Context gives meaning. People make history.
Far more than 1,000 people have come here today.
But authorities are still on high alert.
So into the attention of world leaders.
A complex world demands a comprehensive view.
But with the cleanup efforts more or less under control,
the economic impact is bound to ripple across the country.
There's plastic pollution everywhere.
Because the world today matters for your world tomorrow.
This is the living area of the crew.
And in these mountains, they recently finished building a power plant.
Well, this is something completely different.
The world today, every day on CGTN.
Welcome back to Global Business Europe. Cycling has long been popular in China to ride to work, but cycling for leisure is growing as people enjoy outdoor activities since COVID restrictions were eased.
And China's cycling market has seen a huge surge in the sale of bikes and, of course, all the cycling gear. Our correspondent Huang Yuchang reports.
This bike shop in Wuhan is bustling. More so during weekends, says its owner Yan Yongjie, who admits the surge of customers can get quite overwhelming.
现在没货，或者要等，可以订，应该下周吧，下周周一到周三吧。公路车15000以下全部缺货。
Bikes priced below 15,000 RMB are out of stock, and orders now have to be taken with a deposit. The waiting time is usually between 2 weeks to 2 months. Shortages began when the pandemic hit, especially since the second half of 2020. It has yet to recover.
Money is said to be a non-issue for many amateur bikers willing to spend on any type of bicycle available.
弄下来还好，不到3万。
不到3万，听你说像是一个小数字。
你这样说的，如果你生病的话，你进医院几万块钱可能就没有了，对不对？你这还看那个东西。
For many bikers like him, the experience of the pandemic has been a major factor in the growing popularity of cycling.
对生命也有新的认识，这个很重要。所以疫情也是好事。
Bikes in China were once primarily seen as a tool for daily commuters, but have recently become a lifestyle choice for trendsetters in the country's upper middle class. Zhou Zhou purchased his racing bike in this bike shop and several sets of related products last October, and has since been riding it every day. More and more bike lanes also being built in recent years, allowing a growing number of urbanites to embrace the joy of cycling. Stretching over 100 kilometers, the Wuhan East Lake Greenway has become a beloved route for Zhou Zhou and many other cyclists.
While riding a bike, you can experience the sensation of the wind, release dopamine, and feel the pleasure of your muscles stretching and contracting.
It is my first time riding a road bicycle along a river like this. As I pedal along, feeling the wind rushing past my face and sun warming my skin, I never expected a simple bike ride could be so refreshing and stress relieving.
Urbanites also relish in the chance to broaden their social circles through the numerous bike rides and events organized by bike store owners and clubs.
Through cycling, I met many new fellow bikers. We often ride together, which provides a great opportunity to socialize.
Zhou Zhou says he's determined to take his passion for cycling to the next level and upgrade his equipment to a more high-end model soon. For him and his fellow bikers, cycling is a transformative activity leading towards better health and well-being, one pedal at a time. 黄云畅 CGTN 武汉湖北 Province.
Palestinian militants in the Gaza Strip have fired a barrage of rockets towards Israel after the Israeli army renewed its air raids. At least 2 Palestinians have been killed in the latest attacks. It brings the death toll from 2 days of Israeli bombardment to 17, including a number of children, with dozens injured. There are no reports of serious injuries in Israel, where most rockets are said to have been intercepted.
2 Jewish pilgrims and 3 police guards have been shot dead during an attack at a prominent synagogue on the Tunisian island of Jerba. The attack happened during an annual religious festival. The gunman was shot dead by the police. Pilgrimage to Africa's oldest synagogue regularly draws hundreds of people from Europe and Israel.
Investigators in Kenya have exhumed 21 more bodies as part of an investigation into an alleged starvation cult. The group's accused of ordering followers and their children to stop eating in order to go to heaven. There are reports that their organs may have been removed and sold. The group's leader is in police custody. Authorities say they've identified 133 victims.
Britain's most senior religious figure has made a searing attack on the government's bill on illegal migration. Justin Welby, the leader of the Church of England, speaking in the House of Lords, said the legislation would not stop small boat crossings. He criticised Prime Minister Rishi Sunak's government, saying the bill failed in moral responsibility towards refugees and risked damaging the UK's reputation.
China has successfully launched its largest cargo spaceship into orbit.
3、2、1，点火！点火！
The Tianzhou 6 blasted off from China's space center in Hainan province earlier. It's China's first space supply mission since the completion of the Tiangong space station in November.
At 7.5 tons, the spacecraft, which is designed and produced entirely in China, is also one of the heaviest cargo loads ever sent into space.
Well, the Tianzhou 6 is carrying scientific experiments plus fuel and all the necessities for the astronauts manning China's space station. The crew of 3 have been living on board for around 6 months. Our correspondent Sun Ye reports.
For the first few months since China's space station officially entered into long-term operation, its occupants, the Shenzhou 15 crew who oversaw its completion, described their time as busy, busy, busy in their video diaries. They've completed 4 spacewalks so far, more than previous Shenzhou crews. And on their walks, they've installed equipment for extravehicular scientific as well as other experiments. China's space station can now produce 100% of its own oxygen supply through its onboard regeneration system. And with the National Space Lab powered up, the space station has performed its first ignition experiment earlier this year, with over 40 such experiments to be completed by the end of 2023. The Shenzhou 15 crew successfully obtained the 3-dimensional structural images of their skin cells with the country's self-developed 2-photon microscope. And China's space station has enjoyed relatively calm space weather over the past few months, and scientists on the ground say it's prepared for any possible changes in conditions.
When designing the space station, changes in space weather are taken into account. We've accumulated a lot of experience in dealing with space weather events and have taken corresponding protective measures. Our laboratory began using this device to simulate and study the environment around the space station as early as 2015. And as the space station enters long-term operation, our work continues. In the near future, just like weather forecasts on the ground, we hope there will be space weather forecasts that predict the impact of space weather on Earth, as well as the space station and other spacecraft.
The Shenzhou 16 crew are expected to arrive at the outpost to take over from the Shenzhou 15 crew in a month or so, with the latter returning to Earth, saving the knowledge they've made history. CGTN, Beijing.
The headlines again. Inflation in the United States falls below 5% in April to its lowest rate in 2 years and down from its peak of over 9% last summer.
Our other headlines: Battle of the Skies. Ryanair wins its legal fight against Lufthansa's $6 billion pandemic state bailout. And Toyota announces plans for a big push into China's electric vehicle market, but it faces stiff competition from homegrown brands. And that's it for Global Business Europe. Thank you for watching. There's more on all our stories at europe.cgtn.com, and do follow CGTN Europe on Twitter, Facebook and Instagram. And you can go to CGTN Europe's channel on the Telegram app or scan the QR code on the screen to get stories and updates sent direct to your phone. Coming up next on CGTN, it's Africa Live. We'll see you again tomorrow, same time, same place. From all of the team here in London, it's goodbye. Goodbye.